The success of the 8th of March, which has long ceased to be International Women's Day and has simply become Feminism Day, lies precisely in its systemic inability to resolve what it claims to be mobilizing against. Basically, violence against women. In other words, feminism's success lies in the fact that it is an absolute failure. The logic behind this is easy to understand. Feminism calls for mass mobilizations in response to violence against women. However, under the feminist paradigm, which has been in operation for the past decade, violence against women has increased. And since violence against women has increased, feminism calls even more urgently for massive rallies to condemn violence against women. In other words, it's a vicious circle which, of course, amply benefits minority interests, specifically those who live off gender ideology, who sponge off the state and the taxpayer, who pontificate in schools and universities, or who create their own NGOs or associations which are funded by organisations such as IPPF, Open Society, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Arcus Foundation, Open Democracy, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, among so many others. But the figures are plain to see, and they demonstrate the extent of the feminist failure, which is, nonetheless, the reason for its success. In 2015, the movement Ni Una Menos burst onto the scene in Argentina. This was the beginning of the mass popularization of feminism in the country. The previous year, 2014, the Supreme Court of Justice had concluded that a total of 225 so-called femicides had taken place in the country. For this very reason, Ni Una Menos argued that feminism should become more dominant in order to highlight what was happening and to offer solutions for bringing an end to violence against women. Feminism quickly became the dominant paradigm which took over both public and private arenas. Universities introduced new compulsory subjects and courses on feminism. The media uncritically celebrated everything that smacked of feminism. Every year since then, the state has increased the number of institutions dedicated to gender and feminism, as well as the web of bureaucrats who live off this ideology. To put it in figures, the National Women's Institute received $2.3 million in 2018. In 2019, that figure increased to $2.9 million. Additionally, according to this institute, its budget has increased by 500% since 2015. In terms of policies related to feminism and gender ideology, this same institute has revealed that between 2015 and 2019, the state carried out 57 activities costing over $6.35 billion, representing 13% of total public expenditure and 2.6% of GDP. But what do these numbers mean? To give you some idea, consider for example that in 2019 the famous Argentinian Universal Children's Allowance came to approximately $1.2 billion. In other words, 4 times less than what went towards the gender policies promoted by the National Women's Institute in those years. The same can be said for spending on education and culture, which in 2019 was $2.5 billion, less than half of what was spent on feminist policies, according to UNAM itself, between 2015 and 2019. Now, we should expect that with such constantly increasing sums of money as we have seen, incidences of violence against women would have diminished. Exactly the opposite is true. From 2014 to 2019, femicides in Argentina increased by 45%. This is so because while in 2014 225 femicides were committed, as we have seen, the year 2019 ended with a total of 327 according to the Observatory of Gender Violence. 2 hypotheses are possible. The maximum hypothesis. Feminism not only is not a solution to the problems of women, but actually worsens them, consistent with the context of generalized violence. Minimal hypothesis. At the very least, feminism is definitely incapable of solving women's problems, and this because it has an ideological interpretation of reality which prevents it from analysing the true causes of violence, which are much more complex than its gender claptrap, its common ground and its fantasies such as patriarchy, heteropatriarchy, phallocracy and other such nonsense. In other words, feminism eats up resources and time without yielding any positive results. And this is entirely objective information. Of course, there will always be someone to argue that it was the number of allegations that increased, which is a fallacy because we're not talking here about mere allegations, but about fully documented murders of women. In other words, there has not been an increase merely in allegations, but in the number of women murdered. Despite this failure, feminism is a success story in and of itself. This is its paradox. It is receiving more and more finance, more backing from the rich and famous, more media coverage and celebrity compliance, and more militancy on the part of useful idiots who cannot not be part of fashion. Feminism's success lies in its failure. The more women die, the more urgently required feminism will be, and the more urgently required feminism is, the more political, economic and media success it will have. Einstein said that the definition of madness is to do the same thing over and over again, hoping for different results. To expect violence against women to decrease just by singing a ridiculous anthem, by going topless, by burning churches here and there, by smashing the windows in this or that building, by denaturizing pathetic and guilty men through the absurdity of the new masculinities, by hysterically shouting death to males, or by changing language in order to call it inclusive, is perhaps not what madmen do, but it definitely is what idiots do. Idiots who are incapable of fixing what they are marching for, and who, in the lamentable results arising from this incapability, replicate and aggravate the conditions which make them paradoxically necessary for a dumbed-down society. The 8th of March has been a success. Happy Women's Day.